Coaching Soccer Weekly, episode 355. Questions and answers. Entertaining, educational, and inspiring soccer content to help make you a more effective coach, player, or soccer parent. Hello, and welcome back to Coaching Soccer Weekly, presented by World Class Coaching. My name is Sega Verbinovich, and this is the podcast devoted to bringing you cutting-edge methods, techniques, and tactics for coaching soccer. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced coach who has been training teams for many years, or if you're new to coaching and working with a team for the very first time. There's something we can all do to take our coaching to the next level. Well, it's good to officially be back, and this will be technically the second episode of the year, but it'll be my first one recording. So I'm super excited to get this year started off on the right foot when it comes to this amazing podcast. I do, and this is something that I wanted to say last week, but I do want to say thank you again to you, the listeners, for sticking with me. I really do appreciate that. I appreciate you listening every week, and I'm going to do my best this year to continue and hopefully bring new good content. And I do have something planned next month that is something that I think you will really like, but I'll get into that hopefully next month. But for now, let's talk about essentially what I wanted to talk about last week. Today's actually a really cool episode. I'm going to be talking about this week's games first, then I'll talk about my trip, then I'll talk about what we did on the first week back, then I'll talk about an interesting new league that it's an interesting new professional league, and then I'll answer some questions and answers from our Facebook group that I promised I would answer on the first show of the year. So since this is first show of the year, here I am, keeping my promises. So let's start by talking about this week's games. This week's games were interesting, I'll say that. It was our first game back from the holidays and from a month of not playing games. So our 2013-12 team started, and we played against a team that I call an all-star team. In Canada, the levels go as follows. The first level, the lowest level, is House League. Then after House League, it goes all-star. Then it goes rep, and then it goes into regional, and then it goes into national. That's essentially a big overview of, and very condensed. There are different levels within each tier, except for House League and All-Star. But once you get into Rep, which is kind of like this district league, essentially, is I think what they call it in the U.S. There's different levels within that. Then there's different levels within regional, and then there is kind of a national. It's not a league, it's more tournament type thing. So that's how things are laid out from a youth point of view in Canada. So the team that we played against were essentially a bunch of House League players that came together to form an all-star team. And we see this a lot within the younger age groups. It's a group of players that maybe last summer played together in a House League team and wanted to continue the next year, and rather than the club putting them in another House League season, they just said, okay, you guys can start to compete at a higher level. The problem is we're not an all-star team. We're at a much higher level than an all-star team. We are a rep team. So the game started out, and I could tell right away, and what I did was I gave two of our players blue pennies, and I put them on the other team. We scored probably within the first 2 minutes, and right away I just kind of gave them players, essentially said, don't worry about the other coaches, go on, play for the other team. And that's what they did. We did that all throughout the first half. Then at the second half, their, better players showed up, and there were, I think, a family of 3 boys who came on. The second half, the beginning was a little more competitive because those 3 players brought in a higher level of play along with our extra 2 players, I think. And then once we took our players off, 7v7 again, and they again kept their level of play, which kind of put us on the back foot because we weren't used to, because we for a whole half we were just playing a all-star team with two extra players that were ours, which didn't do much, but we still, after about, I would say, 5 minutes, we took control and played the right way, and that's kind of what happened. And we had the same thing on Sunday with our 2014 team. Unfortunately, the other coach did not want our players. So within the first half, we've already played this team. We've already kind of destroyed them. So for the first half, I really tried to make it tough for our players. And we ended up scoring one goal, which I really liked that we only scored one goal. And then in the second half, my team talk was essentially, let's score now. And in the second half, we kind of unloaded, got 5 goals. And throughout that whole second half, I was trying to talk to the other coach, do you want any of my players, those kinds of things, because I think that's really important. It's really important to try and not only challenge your team, but make the other team able to play at this level, right? And if they're not, then it's a waste of time, and I don't think the other coach kind of saw that. He kept saying, which I completely disagree with, they have to learn. Well, they're not learning anything by getting scored on every 2 minutes. That's not an education. They're not learning anything. They're not touching the ball. They're not competing. So, but he was a young coach and he was set in his ways, which is fine, but we're moving up in the 2014 to the next division up, which is Division 2. We were in Division 3. This was the first year that we put a team together, so I just kind of put them in the lowest division, again thinking we would play rep teams, but we've been playing all-star teams. Going into that Division 2, I don't know how we'll do. There are a lot of things that this team needs to get better at. We have some players at a very elite level on this team, and then we have some players that aren't, that are pretty new to our academy and pretty new to our system of play. So we'll see how we do. I think we'll compete. I don't think we'll win a lot of games in that Division 2, but who knows? I'm not really sure the quality, but we're definitely not a Division 3 team. We're definitely a Division 2 team. So I'm excited to see how that goes. I think our first game in Division 2 is next week, but I'm not 100% sure. It might not be. So we'll see what happens. But I'm excited for moving forward. As for the 2013-2012s, they will start to play properly, and by that I mean against other rep teams, which are probably the only teams that should have been in this league, because it's a very tough league. So the problem with our district is that we don't have different tiers, so you have a lot of discrepancies when it comes to level of play, and that's going to be changed with our partnership with the other 2 districts. So we're joining up to essentially create one mega district, and hopefully what that will do is that will create different divisions so that we have games that are always competitive. For those that don't follow me on Instagram, I was away during the holidays visiting family in Israel, and what I found really interesting there that we don't have in Canada or the US. I've lived in the US. I lived in Chicago and Kansas as well. So I kind of know how the suburbs are, and especially where I lived in Kansas in the US. And then obviously I know Canada really well. But what they have in Israel is really interesting. There are concrete soccer fields everywhere that you go. Absolutely everywhere. Within, 4 or 5 blocks, every single elementary school has its own concrete soccer field or futsal court, and it's covered. So in the summer, the Israel summer is very hot, so you can still play. When it rains, which it doesn't really rain that often in Israel, you can still play. And that's something that we're really missing here in Canada. We have a bunch of grass fields, but those fields aren't covered. And, the question is, if we had more fields and there's more access to soccer essentially for kids to just go meet up after school or right after school, stay and play on their school futsal court, would that have made a difference? And I think yes. I mean, the street soccer in Brazil is something that always comes up in coaching education. And I think it's a very fair point. You know, if you're in an environment where you're allowed creativity and you're just allowed to play, I think that has a lot of benefits for youth development. I don't think it's the only way to develop players. That's why when we do our 1v1s, it's a little bit different than that street environment and takes it to a different level. And to have an expert coach there, I think is something that's worth it, you know. But having said all that, if they are going with their friends after school, constantly playing, developing a love for the game, and just kind of going at it. I saw a game it was the exact same futsal court, but they actually had turf on it. And it was just a group of kids came together, stepped off the bus, went onto the field and started playing. There were fouls, there were 1v1s, there were moves, there were kids that were showing off, there were passes, there were shots, there were celebrations. It was so interesting to see how the kids reacted, right, in comparison to games. In our 2014 game, 2 of our players yelled at the ref, which I stopped immediately, but there's no ref. You just play. If you have an argument, you figure it out. You figure out how to play. And I think that's so valuable and something that we're missing in North America, or at least in Canada and the US. It's just, it doesn't exist. And it's tough in Canada, obviously, because snow and winter is so long, but it's something that we have to be creative and figure out a way to allow kids a place to play always. But other than that, I mean, even with that, like it was a fantastic trip, just kind of seeing my family and, you know, walking around, and a really good reset for me, and then to come back. And last week was our first week back. And whenever we have a break for any amount of time, I always come back and go back to the basics for that whole week. And the basics are 1v1. We start with Shark Attack with the older kids. Then we do pretty much a full session of 1v1. And the reason I do that is simply because I want the players, the very first thing that they do when they come back, they need to manipulate the ball. They have to be on the ball for an extended period of time. And on top of that, the 1v1s increases the competitiveness and the physicality of the game, which I just love to start. Let's start that environment. Let's start that environment as soon as we get back. And then the next week is usually when we start going into 2v2s or 4v4s. We actually did some 4v4s on Friday with the kids that had a game that week. So, but most of that session always looks like 1 player, 1 ball, 2 players, 1 ball. That's really what I'm looking for, and that gets that level up. And the players who were essentially not playing soccer, because again, it's winter here, where do you play? There's nowhere to play other than your house, and you know, some players live in apartments and places that they can't play. So let's just get them back in. Let's make sure their touch is good. And you can definitely see a difference when we haven't been playing for 3 weeks, you know, or for some of these players even a month, because they went away and then we had our break. So that's really what I do when we have that extended break. So I'm really excited to talk about this, and I'm going to read out some stuff, which is really cool. But there's a new league in Spain, and it's run by Piqué, former Barcelona player, and it's really interesting. I'm going to read out the rules from this website here that I found. It's insane. I've seen it. I didn't get some of it, but let's figure this out together. So this is really cool. Okay, so it's a 12-team competition. The presidents from each team are drawn from like the world of football, streaming, social media, whatever that is. It's 7 aside, and each team has 12 players on their team. Now, the first 10 players were picked from a draft, which is insane. And then the 11th and 12th players are what are called ringers. In most cases, they're ex-professionals, but in some cases, they're actually current professionals. And the 11th player has to be the same for the 12th for the whole season, and the 12th player can change from week to week. So you can have a different player every single week, which is absolutely insane. Okay, so now let's get into like the real rules. Okay, here we go. So like I said, it's a 12-team competition. Every Sunday, 40-minute games. So it's 2 halves of 20 minutes. Each team will play each other twice in the season. 7 aside. But there are twists. Okay, fans can vote for some rules. Kickoffs are like water polo style. So that means that like 2 teams line up across their goal lines and then race to the ball in the middle when the buzzer sounds. That's kind of like dodgeball. There are offsides, unlimited substitutions, and there's something called a sin bin for yellow cards and red cards. 2 minutes for the former and then 5 minutes for the latter. So it's essentially like penalties, like in hockey. There's also VAR, although only upon request. Each team calls for VAR to review a decision once in a match. If they are successful in their appeal, they will maintain their option to turn to VAR again. So this kind of sounds like football to me. If they're wrong, yeah, they don't get another chance. So this is just like football. And let's see, what other rules? If the games are drawn, there's a penalty shootout. But it's like the old MLS penalty shootout where players start at the halfway line and have 5 seconds to score. So that's like hockey, like the current hockey rules of how hockey does penalty shootouts. And then the biggest difference is the golden card. Okay, I watched this and I was like, what is happening? So the golden card is selected by the coach before the game. They select from 5 cards, but they're not shown what they're picked. So they're in like a gold envelope, and you essentially pick out of these 5, and they could be anything. There could be anything inside them. And then, so let's talk about what those are. So there's instant penalty. Okay, so like you get an instant penalty shot. Rob a card, so you can steal a card. Right. Remove an opposition player for 2 minutes. Any goal scored in the next minute counts as doubles, and a joker card. The joker card, coaches can choose to use any of the cards. Okay, so this is ridiculous. This is absolutely insane. And it reminds me of I think it's called the X League, I think it was called in football. I'm not 100% sure, but this is really interesting. I think it's the first time in a while that we've seen, because it's happened before, but it's the first time in a while that we've seen kind of today's media really influence a league. So you can say what you want, but soccer's pretty much stayed the same for a very long time. Yes, you can talk about a little bit of changes here and there, but there aren't big changes. VAR is probably the most recent one, but that's not really a change to the rules of the traditional game. If we take today's game and we start going back in World Cups, then it's pretty much the same game, right? If someone from the 50s or the 40s watched the game now, they would know what's going on. But if they watched this Kings League, at certain points it'd be like, what? That's not what. You can't do that. Wait, what? Like, it's very questionable. And I love that. I love that someone is finally asking questions about the rules. And what I really thought was interesting was bringing it down from 11 to 7. Because as we know, small-sided games are essentially the ways players develop. So to see a place like this where there's still throw-ins and stuff like that, which is different than the way we play 7v7, and there's a lot of different rules. I love this golden card. The golden card for me symbolizes something that I studied a long time ago, which is called game theory. And essentially, you can look at different video games and pull things out from there that you can use in your training session. That's kind of how I summed it up. It's definitely way more complicated than that. That's not that's not the definition of game theory, but essentially from doing a lot of research into it, that's what I took to start looking at different video games that are engaging kids and take certain parts of that have a lot of value in keeping kids in the game and creating a better love for the game. So what I created my own cards way back when, and they had pictures of professional players and they had their skill. So for example, I had an Iniesta card where if your team made 10 passes, it would be a goal. I had a Christine St. Clair card where every goal counted as twice because she is one of the best goal scorers in the history of women's soccer. And so there were all these different cards. And just like in this Kings League, I would go up to the players at the beginning of the game and I would give them, they wouldn't be able to see because the top of the cards are all the same. They would pick a card and that would be the only way they could score. So it's a little bit different, but this is really cool. It's really interesting. It's called Kings League. They stream it on TikTok, right? Like it's so much more accessible. I just love that it's challenging the status quo. And I really like that because I mean, I don't know if it'll grow into something really, really big, but at least there are going to be people who are going to be like, okay, maybe we should start looking at different rules. Maybe, and after this World Cup, the way penalties are done, oh my God, that was heartbreaking to watch that. And I talked about that as well. I think there has to be something different, and I think it'll start the conversation. Are throw-ins really what should be done when a ball goes out of bounds? I don't know, but what are some other interesting ways? There are so many questions that you can start to ask yourself after watching a league like that and going, okay, not everything could be set in stone in the future of soccer, and that's exciting. It's exciting because who knows what will happen in 10 years. Maybe there will be youth clubs that are really looking to get their players into Kings League. Like, that would be really cool, So if you want to look into that, Kings League, I think you can follow them on TikTok too and watch their live games. I watched one. It came up yesterday in my feed, and I was like, oh, what's this? And started watching it. So if you haven't heard about it, Kings League, again, you can search up Kings League PK. It's in Spanish, but so is La Liga. So, yeah, have a look and see if you like it. Well, this is usually my favorite part of the show, answering questions. I love that. I used to love when Tom did that, and now with the Facebook group, I can do that much more easily. I'm going to try and do this more often, go in every once in a while, just see what's out there, and answer questions. So there's a question that I promised I would answer. I'll do that, and then I'll go into some other questions. Hello, I've greatly enjoyed the podcast and info shared here in the group. Shout out to the group there. Episode 352, you talk about 9v9 formations, options, and I'm curious why I chose the 3-2-2-1 over, say, a 2-4-2. He goes on to say that he coaches a U10 team, and just some different things that he noticed within the different formations. I'll talk about why we're making the switch and go from there as to why we play the way that we play. The way that I used to have it was we would be working towards a 4-3-3. That was kind of the ultimate goal for us getting into 11v11. However, I've kind of shifted my thinking since then, which is something that I do a lot. I really like to reflect on what we're doing And the reason is because we were getting blown out by teams that, frankly, we shouldn't be. Our offense was okay. We were struggling scoring goals as well, but the amount of goals that were going in based on the players we had in those situations didn't really make sense. And when we struggle in specific areas on the field, the way that I like to remedy that situation is simply by putting more players there. So we were playing before a 4-3-1, and with that, our fullbacks would push up and go inverted in line with our center defensive mid, and our two attacking mids would go out as wingers. So we were essentially playing a 2-3-3. And what that did was counterattacks, because the field is so big that we're playing on, and the players that are back there are actually 2012s. Our two defenders are 2012 players. They were just getting demolished by these giant 2011 forwards with the speed, and they just couldn't cope. So instead of doing the same thing over and over again, I wanted to bring a player back to help them. And that's how the three came about. I watched a team play with a back three and really liked the fact that it was really hard for us to break them down, even on the counterattacks. So because of that is why I switched it. Now, based on what I said, you can make changes to your formation. If you see that your team is having a really difficult time getting the ball from the defensive line to the forward line, it's probably because there's a disconnect and you're missing a midfield, an extra midfielder there. So you can take a player from, I would say, the forwards and bring them down into the defensive, the midfield line, and add a player there, which would help that cohesiveness and that flow between defense, midfield, or forward. And that's really the way that I like to approach things. If we're struggling in a certain line, I would just add players there and take it from a different line that I know isn't going to be as impacted. Here's another question. Hey guys, I have a U11 girls rec team, and one of the issues I have with them is being physical. Getting in and attacking the ball, using their body to make space, being afraid of the ball, and being kicked towards them. I was wondering if anyone has experienced this, and if they had any good drills or techniques. I really like that question. That was something that our players would struggle with, the physicality part of it. And to be honest, that was my biggest hurdle as a player. I'm pretty sure I got a concussion or something when I was younger. I remember the incident. I went up for a header and came down, and ever since that play, I was just scared of being physical. And it was something that impacted my whole soccer career. So for me, I was never physical after that. I was physical before, and then after that, I just wasn't. So it was something that I really wanted my players to be. And for a long time, they weren't. When I was watching the 1v1s that we do, there wasn't as much contact as I would like. And I reflected on that for a very long time. And the reason was, my understanding was, if you don't know how to defend yourself, you're not going to be excited to get into those situations because you're going to be scared of getting hurt. If you know how to protect yourself, then you're not going to be afraid to get physical. I played goalie I played roller hockey, and I was a goalkeeper. And when I didn't have my pads on, I refused to get in the net. But as soon as I put on my pads, I had no trouble getting in front of shots, lunging at players. If you feel protected, and this is in every instance in life, you are more likely to take risks. So for me, especially with girls, and honestly not just with girls, it's mostly with our youngest players, we teach them how to protect themselves, and that's shielding. We teach them the importance of getting your shield up and using your shield to defend yourself in every situation. When you have the ball, when you're dribbling, how do you get your shield up, protect yourself? And for me, that activity starts with shark attack. And shark attack is probably one of the most intimidating environments other than our 1v1s that we have, because you have 6, 7 players coming at you trying to steal the ball from you. And it gets even more intense when someone kicks the ball out and that player stays in there with the intention of stealing someone else's ball to win. I've talked about shark attack in the past. You're all sharks inside the water. Your job is to kick someone else's ball out and keep your ball in the game. It's called sharks and minnow. There's thousands of different names for it. So for me, in that activity, in that game that we play, we make sure every single session to stop the game and to focus and teach the players how to shield the ball from incoming players. And when they're confident that someone's going to come in and they can shield them away, then they're 1v1s. And the way that they play is elevated so much because they're not scared anymore. They're not scared of players coming at them. And they've experienced that 1,000 times. Another question which I really like is about speed and agility training. Here's the question. Some of my U12 rec girls are just super slow and their running looks awkward. Any tips on improving general running skills? I know exactly what this person is talking about because we have a lot of beginner players that come in and their movement is very awkward. Now, I want to be clear. I'm a soccer coach. I don't pretend that I am an expert on anything else because I am so not. I'm not good at other things. So because of that, I find people that are experts in those fields, and I talk to those parents right away as soon as they come into my program. I will tell them what I think, because players come in, they do a tryout, and then I talk to the parents, let them know what level I think they're at, and I will say, your child is running a little awkward. If I were in your position, I don't say you have to, because if I were in your position, those are the words that I use, I would send them to, and then I give them a name of someone that I personally trust, who is either an athletic trainer who specializes in that kind of stuff. I've also there's a chiropractor that I work with who has a specialty in sports science. So players can go in, do tests. He runs, I think, like a half hour with them. And he goes through different tests and balance, stuff like that. He asks them to do different things. It's a sports performance center. So, and then he kind of tells the parent, okay, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that this muscle, this is weak. Here are the things that you should do to train that. So that's what I do, and I think that's really important. There are things that we can do to make kids' development worse, and that's a big thing. If you don't know what's going on, and I don't think most coaches do, including me, I don't know what's going on in a child when they're going through puberty, when they're growing. I don't know the history of that child. I don't know if they were in a car accident, they broke their leg, twisted their ankle. I don't know, and maybe they didn't strengthen it. I don't know. So sending them to a medical professional who can thoroughly go through their history, analyze what their body movement is like, and there are specific people who are really good at, okay, I can see that when they're running, they're favoring their left side, which is probably because of this, and that. And then on top of that, with girls, and this is according to the science, they're much more likely to get ACL injuries. And if they're already starting out running awkwardly, then there's such a big chance that they're going to tear their ACL. And it's really interesting with women. that I speak to, a lot of them that I've spoken to have torn their ACL. It's a lot more rare in males. None of my coaches have torn their ACL. None of the males. I've had 3 women coaches. All of them have torn their ACL. So there's a disconnect here. And if we can catch it early, we do a lot of injury prevention, which is different. We do a lot of 1-foot hopping, stuff like that. But it has nothing to do with if a player's running awkwardly, I can't fix that. I don't think any coach can fix that personally. It needs to be someone who is very knowledgeable to fix it. And I want to be clear. I'm not talking about, quick feet stuff that can increase, a player who's already okay. And that's completely different. That's not what I'm talking about. And if you've been a coach for a long time, you know that there are players that run awkwardly. That's what I'm talking about, right? There are speed and agility things. For me, I don't do that in practice. We have an hour with our players. We work on soccer. We work on 1v1s. We work on tactics. We work on transition, first touch, passing, shooting. We work on all these things, but we stick to the soccer. If parents want more, again, I send them to someone else. Here's another question. This one's, I think, a little tough. Starts like this. Question for the group. How do you handle transition from season to season, specifically cutting players from the team as part of the tryout process? And then he goes on to talk about his team. Then he asks another question. Do you give them more than one season to develop? Expectations, stuff like that. So when I opened the academy, I made a point in saying I will never, ever cut a player from a team once they have made the team. Now, that's tough. That's tough to say, and that's tough to stick to because of certain things. So here's one of them. Players that start with us with 3 times a week and change it to once a week, they, throughout their soccer careers, aren't able to keep up with those players that continue 3 times a week with us. And that is the only time usually that I will cut a player. And I will basically tell their parents, listen, it's just not fair. Your son or daughter has been coming once a week. The rest have been coming 3 or twice a week. And that's the only discrepancy there. If a player comes to me 3 times a week, and they're always coming to me 3 times a week, and they have made one of our teams, meaning that they have come in, they've worked really hard, they've gotten to the level of our team, then there is no reason that I can think of that they shouldn't be at that same level. And that is because we focus on development, and we know that our environment develops players. On top of that, our games are situations where me and the coaches that sit with me can see what the players are really struggling with. For example, we had in our 2014 games, we had 2 players who are really, really struggling with receiving and passing. And as a coach, knowing that, I'm not going to cut them because of that. Rather, my job is to coach them to the level of the rest of the players. So what am I going to do in the next 3-4 sessions? I'm going to take those 2 players aside, and I'm going to teach them that specific technique, that specific skill that is going to make them better and make them be a part of the team that I originally thought they were good enough for. And if I can't do that, and they're with me 3 times a week, and I want to make that really clear, they are with me 3 times a week, then it is my fault. It is not their fault, and they should not be kicked out of the team. I just have to do better. I have to find a different way to approach the situation so that they can get it, because it doesn't make sense, especially at 2014 when They are so easy to teach, I find. So for me, I don't cut players. Players cut time of practice, and as a result, they don't play on the team. We have a rule that you must be practicing twice or 3 times a week to play in the games. That's the rule. And I've had parents who, they come to me in the middle of the season. They say, we want to go from 3 times to once a week. I say, no problem. But just so you know, that's going to affect your child's playing time. Simply because it is not fair that the rest of the team is practicing 3 times a week and they're working really hard. So until your child goes 3 times a week again, I cannot guarantee that they will get more playing time. And that's fair, I think. We cut that because the assumption going into the season is everyone's practicing twice or 3 times a week. And that's what we need. And as long as you are doing that, you will get equal playing time. I have one more question. This is one that I've been answering myself as a business person. This is something really important that every business owner has to go through and ask. And it's about their competition. How do you determine if an academy or club is a good academy or club? And you can change that question and ask, how is your direct competition good competition or weaker competition, right? And you can do a whole SWOT analysis and all that kind of business word stuff. But we're not going to do that. We're going to talk really about how I evaluate the clubs and academies that I play against, not the teams. The teams don't matter. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I found in my plus 10 years of coaching, the teams that I play against do not matter at all. And I'll give you a perfect example. When my 2012s were under 8s, we played a team that was, and I spoke about them all the time, it was the hockey team. They would, in the summer, take a bunch of hockey players, big, strong, physical, fast players, and they would form a soccer team, and they would go and play. They played against us in U8, and then they played against us in U9. And then suddenly last year, they were gone. And this year, they're gone. The team fell apart. A lot of teams fall apart. A lot of teams' players leave and go somewhere else. So teams don't matter. Clubs, academies as a whole matter. And the way that I evaluate those clubs and teams is the consistency of each team to perform at a high level. If I'm playing your 2010 team, which I'll give you another example. This weekend, the team that I spoke about that played our 2013s, the All-Star team, we played against their 2010s in the summer, and they were really good. They were a great team. We battled every single game. Sometimes we won, sometimes they won. I really liked their coach. Really nice guy. We were able to kind of talk and all that and communicate in a really positive way. And then we played their 2013 team, 2012 team, and it was an all-star team. So there wasn't a consistency of that. However, there are clubs that in every single age group, it doesn't matter who they have. They will always compete against us and do well. And those are my direct competition that I know are clubs that are doing a decent job in player development. The problem is, again, the relationship between teams and age groups. If there is no relationship, which a lot of the time there isn't, that's a problem because you're not going to have consistency. You're not going to have players that can adapt to harder situations, right? And that's what we have because most of our players, every single one of our teams has players that are playing up. Every single one of our teams. And they are not out of place. They're not the best player. Some are, even when they're playing up. But a lot of them are struggling. But that's okay. They come back down into their age group and play. But our philosophy is always that of a player should never be comfortable, and there should be ease of transition between age groups. I had a player, or one of our 2014s. He's absolutely amazing, and I spoke about this a lot yesterday in our Zoom meeting. Every time he gets the ball, without fail, he will do one of the following. He will beat one or more than one players. He will make a brilliant pass. He will shoot the ball, or he will score. Without fail, he only does those things. Out of 10 times, he will lose the ball once or twice. The rest, he will do one of those things. And he has been training with, he's a 2014, he's been training with our 2012s since he was 6 years old. So that's a player that has consistently been there at a very high level, continues to train with them, and just plays with our 2014 team because that's what needs to happen. He's not allowed to play in that 2013 league because it's a 2013-2012. I don't want him to get hurt. So he's just playing with the 2014s. In the summer, that's going to change. He's going to play 2014 and 2013, right? So these are the things that our players are given opportunities to do. And you can say that, yes, you know, he's a tier 2 player. He goes and plays in tier 1. Okay, fair. That's a harder level, but it's not as different as playing a year up with kids that are physically stronger than you and faster than you. I guess you can argue that tier 1 players are more than tier 2, but if you're a tier 2 player and you can play tier 1, the argument is, in my opinion, you should just be playing tier 1, right? Unless the team is just so good and that player can't really break into that team, which I really don't like, right? For us, our players play on 2 teams because they're allowed to. They're allowed to play a year up, and they're allowed to play their age. And by the way, this is for youth. This is up till U13. I don't think you can do that above U13. I think you have to kind of stick to one team. Thanks for listening to another episode of Coaching Soccer Weekly. I really love doing these episodes where I get to answer listeners' questions, and I'm going to start doing them a little bit more often, maybe once a month or something like that, just now because it's so much easier with the Facebook group. It's allowing any coach that wants to ask questions, not just to me, but to other coaches, and just get opinions and start a conversation. So I'm really, really liking the Facebook group. And if that's something that you want to be a part of, if you want to be a part of the conversation, or you just want to listen in and read comments and read questions to get you thinking about things, I think that would be really great. As soon as a notification comes up with your name on it, I will let you into the group. All you have to do is search up Coaching Soccer Weekly on Facebook, and that's pretty much it. So until next week, enjoy the journey.
Hey, thanks for watching all the way to the end, and you can check out more of our videos right here. And if you haven't done so already, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and the subscribe button.